Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I chose to ignore, the way Marcus would glance at his phone and smile that secret smile. How he started working late more often, claiming his architecture firm was landing bigger contracts, the expensive cologne that wasn't the one I'd bought him for Christmas. But when you've been married for 8 years, when you've built what you think is a solid life together, you tell yourself these things don't mean what you fear they might mean. I was so naive. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I lost everything in a single day, and discovered I'd never really lost anything at all. Our house in Westchester was everything I dreamed of when I was a little girl playing with dollhouses, white colonial with black shutters, wraparound porch, and a garden where I spent my Saturday mornings tending to roses and dahlias. Marcus had bought it for us 3 years into our marriage, back when his firm was taking off and money seemed to flow as easily as water. "You deserve this," he'd said, carrying me over the threshold like we were newlyweds again. "My successful wife deserves the perfect home." Successful, that is what he used to call me. I was a marketing director at a boutique consulting firm, pulling in 6 figures and loving every challenge that came across my desk. But when Marcus's career exploded, when he started designing luxury hotels and celebrity homes, he convinced me to step back. "We don't need 2 careers consuming our lives," he'd said, his hands on my shoulders as we stood in our beautiful kitchen. "I want to take care of you. Let me be the provider while you focus on making our home perfect, maybe start thinking about babies." The babies never came. We tried for 2 years, went through the tests, the treatments, the monthly disappointments that slowly chipped away at something fundamental between us. Marcus grew distant during that time, though I told myself it was just the stress. Men handle these things differently, I reasoned. He is just processing in his own way, so I threw myself into being the perfect wife instead. I learned to cook gourmet meals, redecorated our home twice, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and maintained a social calendar that would make a diplomat proud. I hosted dinner parties where Marcus would charm his colleagues and potential clients while I played the gracious hostess, making sure everyone's glass stayed full and the conversation flowed. "Sarah's amazing," I'd hear him tell people. "I don't know how she does it all." But lately, even those compliments felt hollow, performative, like he was reading lines from a script he'd grown bored with. The morning everything changed started like any other. I woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of Marcus's shower running. By the time he came downstairs, I had fresh coffee brewing and his breakfast waiting steel, cut oats with blueberries and a side of Greek yogurt, just how he liked it. "Thanks, babe," he said. But he was already scrolling through his phone instead of looking at me. "What does your day look like?" I asked, settling across from him with my own coffee. "Busy. The Henderson project is in crisis mode, might be another late night." Another late night, that made 4 this week. And it was only Wednesday. "Maybe this weekend, we could." "Actually," he interrupted, finally looking up from his screen, "I need to fly to Miami this weekend. Site visit for a potential new client. Big opportunity." Something cold settled in my stomach, but I smiled anyway. "Of course, I understand." He kissed my forehead on his way out. The same distracted kiss he'd been giving me for months. I watched through the window as his BMW pulled out of our circular driveway, and for the first time I let myself acknowledge the thought I'd been pushing away. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. That afternoon, while reorganizing Marcus's home office, a task I'd been putting off for weeks, I found the receipt. It was tucked inside a book on architectural theory, a slim piece of paper that might as well have been a bomb. "Tiffany and Company $8,500 purchased 3 days ago." Me hands shook as I stared at it. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was for me, maybe an anniversary gift, though our anniversary wasn't for another 4 months, maybe a surprise just because present, though Marcus hadn't surprised me with jewelry in years, but deep in my gut, I knew. I sat in his leather chair surrounded by the awards and accolades of his successful career, and felt my world tilt off its axis. $8,500, that was more than Marcus had ever spent on jewelry for me, including my engagement ring. The sound of the garage door opening sent me scrambling to put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I tucked the receipt back in the book, smoothed down my hair, and was standing at the kitchen island slicing vegetables when Marcus walked in. "How was your day?" I asked. my voice surprisingly steady. Exhausting. The Henderson clients are impossible to please. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and leaned against the counter, watching me work. What did you do today? Oh, Aaron's cleaned your office a bit. I watched his face carefully, but he didn't even flinch. If anything, he looked relieved that someone had tackled the mess. You are amazing, Sarah. I don't deserve you. The words that should have made me feel loved instead made me feel sick. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in our king-size bed, listening to Marcus breathe beside me, wondering if the woman who'd received that Tiffany jewelry was also lying awake somewhere, maybe admiring whatever beautiful thing my husband had bought her. The next morning, Marcus left early for his site meetings. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then did something I'd never done in 8 years of marriage. I went through his things systematically. His computer was password protected, but I knew Marcus. He used the same variations of passwords for everything. Our address, our wedding date, his birthday. It took me 3 tries to get into his laptop. What I found there destroyed the last of my illusions: email threads with someone named Cassandra. Photos of them together at restaurants I recognized, places Marcus had claimed to be having business dinners, hotel reservations in both their names, and worst of all, real estate listings for apartments in the city, with notes in Marcus's handwriting about our new start. I sat in his chair, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, and realized this wasn't just an affair, this was an exit strategy. The most recent email was from yesterday. "Faye can't wait to see you in Miami this weekend, baby. I've already talked to my lawyer about the best way to handle the divorce. He says since Sarah hasn't worked in 5 years, and we don't have kids, I should be able to keep most of the assets. She'll get some alimony, but nothing crazy. We'll be free to start our life together by Christmas." Faye Cassandra had responded, "I love you so much, Marcus. I can't wait to not have to hide anymore. That house in Westchester will sell quickly. We can use the money for our place in the city, and maybe a summer home in the Hamptons. Life is going to be perfect." I read those words 3 times before they fully sank in. They weren't just planning to be together, they were planning to use my home, the house I'd lovingly maintained and decorated, the garden I'd planted with my own hands, to fund their new life together. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating that for a moment, I couldn't breathe, but then something else kicked in. Not rage. Exactly, something colder and more focused. If Marcus thought he could discard me like an outdated piece of furniture after I'd spent 5 years supporting his career and maintaining his home, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I printed every email, every photo, every document. I made copies of bank statements, investment accounts, anything I could find. Then I closed his laptop, cleaned up my coffee cup, and went about my day as if nothing had happened. When Marcus came home that evening, I had dinner waiting and a smile on my face. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "Wonderful," I said. "I am so excited about your Miami trip. You work so hard, you deserve a little relaxation." He actually had the audacity to look guilty for half a second, but then he smiled and squeezed my hand. "Thanks for understanding, babe. Not every wife would be so supportive." No, I thought, not every wife would be. Marcus left for Miami on Friday morning with 2 suitcases and a promise to call when he landed. I knew he wouldn't. The emails had made it clear this was meant to be their romantic getaway weekend, probably involving discussions of wedding venues and baby names. I spent Friday cleaning the house from top to bottom, not because it needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands while my mind processed what was coming. I had a feeling this weekend would be more significant than Marcus realized. He came back Sunday night glowing with happiness and fake suntan, spinning stories about the difficult client, and how glad he was to be home. He made love to me that night with more passion than he'd shown in months, and I realized he was probably thinking about her the entire time. Monday morning brought the papers. I was in the garden deadheading roses, when the process server arrived. He was a thin man in a cheap suit who looked apologetic as he handed me the manila envelope. "Mrs. Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes, you've been served." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope, even though I'd been expecting this, but seeing it in black and white, the petition for divorce, the claim that our marriage was irretrievably broken, The request for division of assets still hit like a physical blow. Marcus was asking for everything: the house, the investments, the cars. He was claiming that since I hadn't worked in 5 years, I'd contributed nothing to our marital wealth. He was offering me a small monthly alimony for 2 years, to help with the transition to single life. The cruelest part was the section about fault. Marcus was claiming that I was emotionally distant and unwilling to fulfill the normal duties of marriage. He was painting himself as the victim of a cold, disconnected wife who'd failed to give him the love and support he deserved. I sat on my front steps, reading these lies about my own life, and felt something inside me break. But what rose from the wreckage wasn't the desperate, pleading woman Marcus probably expected. It was something harder, something with sharp edges. I called the number on the divorce papers and made an appointment with Marcus's lawyer for the next day. When the receptionist asked if I had legal representation, I said no, which was true. What I didn't say was that I didn't plan to need any. That evening, Marcus came home from work with flowers, cheap grocery store roses, not the expensive arrangements he used to surprise me with. "Sarah, we need to talk." He looked nervous as he sat across from me at our kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd made plans for our future, where he'd held my hand during the worst of our fertility struggles. "I know you got the papers today," he said. "I want you to know this isn't easy for me, but we've grown apart, and I think we both deserve to be happy." I set down my coffee cup and looked at him, really looked at him. When had his eyes become so calculating? When had his handsome face learned to lie so smoothly? "You are right," I said quietly. "We do both deserve to be happy." He looked surprised, maybe even a little disappointed. I think he'd been expecting tears, pleading, maybe threats to fight the divorce. "I am glad you are being reasonable about this. Sarah, my lawyer says, if we can agree on terms quickly, this can be finalized in a few months. You'll get the alimony, of course, and I'll help you find a nice apartment in town. Something more suitable for a single woman. Something more suitable, as if our entire life together had just been me playing house until he decided he was done with me." "That is very generous," I said. "What does Cassandra think about all this?" The blood drained from his face. For a moment he looked like he might deny it, but something in my expression must have warned him off that path. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." I stood up and smoothed my skirt. "I think you should stay at your office apartment tonight. Give us both some space to process this." "Sarah, let me rephrase that. I think you should stay at Cassandra's apartment since you've been paying the rent anyway." He flinched. "It is not what you think. It is exactly what I think, Marcus, and what I think is that you are a coward who spent months planning to destroy our marriage while letting me cook your dinner and warm your bed." I walked toward the front door and held it open. "Get out. This is my house too, for now." Something in my voice made him grab his keys and leave without another word. I watched him drive away, then locked the door behind him, and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to cry. When the tears stopped, I went upstairs and began the most important research of my life. I spent that night going through every box in our attic, every drawer in our bedroom, every file in our home office. I was looking for something specific, something I'd forgotten about until this moment, when I needed it most. My father had died when I was 19, just before my sophomore year of college. He'd been a quiet man, an accountant who lived modestly and never talked much about money. When he passed, my mother and I had assumed there wasn't much to inherit. The house had a small mortgage, there were some savings bonds, enough to pay for the funeral, and help with my college expenses. But I remembered something now, a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. Before he died, during those last days in the hospital, my father had pressed something into my hand. "This is for emergencies only," he'd whispered. "Real emergencies, Sarah, the kind where you need to remember who you really are." It was a credit card, an old worn black card with my name embossed in silver. I'd been 19 and confused by grief, and I'd tucked it into my wallet without really thinking about it. Over the years, I'd transferred it from wallet to wallet, never using it, never even thinking about it. It was just a piece of my father's legacy, like his old watch or his favorite books. Now, digging through my jewelry box at 2 a.m., I found it. The card was even more worn now, The black plastic faded and the numbers barely visible. But my name was still there. Sarah Elizabeth Coleman, my maiden name from a time when I thought I knew who I was and what I wanted. I sat on my bedroom floor, holding this piece of my father's memory, and wondered if it even worked anymore. The account was probably closed years ago, but something made me slip it into my purse anyway. The next morning, I met with Marcus's lawyer, David Brennan. His office was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit who looked at me like I was a particularly dim-witted prey. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, not bothering to stand when I entered. "I understand you don't have representation. That is unusual for a case involving this level of assets. I am still deciding on my legal strategy," I said, taking the seat across from his massive desk. "Well, I hope you'll consider the very fair offer my client is making. 5 years of marriage contributions don't typically warrant much in terms of asset division, especially given your departure from the workforce." He slid a document across the desk. The settlement offer was even worse than what had been in the original papers. A tiny monthly stipend for 18 months, and the suggestion that I might want to seek employment to support your transition to independent living. "This seems quite generous," I said, scanning the papers. "Of course, I'll need to review our complete financial picture before I can agree to anything." Brennan's smile was condescending. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think you'll find that your husband has been quite thorough in documenting all marital assets. There are no surprises here." "Oh, I am sure Marcus has been very thorough," I agreed. "But I'd like to contribute my own financial documentation to the process." I reached into my purse and pulled out my father's credit card, for instance. "I should probably declare this account." Brennan barely glanced at it. "Mrs. Mitchell, a credit card isn't an asset. In fact, if there is debt on it, it could complicate your settlement." "You are absolutely right," I said, standing up. "I should probably check the balance before we proceed. Is there somewhere I can make a quick call?" He gestured toward the hallway, with barely concealed impatience. "The reception area has privacy booths." I thanked him and stepped outside, my heart hammering as I dialed the customer service number on the back of the card. I had no idea what I was going to find, but something my father had said in the hospital was echoing in my mind. "Real emergencies, Sarah, the kind where you need to remember who you really are." The automated system asked for the card number, then my social security number, then transferred me to a human representative. "Good afternoon, Miss Coleman. This is Jennifer with Heritage Private Banking. How may I assist you today?" "Private banking. I'd like to check the balance on my account, please." "Certainly. Can you confirm your mother's maiden name for security purposes?" I gave her the information, still expecting to hear that the account had been closed or was overdrawn. "Thank you. Your current available credit limit is $2.8 million, and your account balance is, let me see, $47,832,000. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to sit down in the nearest chair. "I am sorry, could you repeat that?" "Your account balance is $47,832,000. Miss Coleman, would you like me to email you a detailed statement?" Father, my quiet, modest father who clipped coupons and drove the same car for 15 years, my father who never talked about money, and lived in a simple ranch house until the day he died. "Miss Coleman, are you still there?" "Yes," I managed. "Yes, I am here. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I see you haven't accessed this account in quite some time." I didn't know about it. My father passed away when I was 19. I had the card but never used it. Jennifer's voice became warmer. "I am so sorry for your loss. Your father was a very valued client. When you have a moment, you might want to come into one of our offices. There are some additional accounts and investments tied to this card that you should be aware of." Additional accounts, additional investments. "Actually," I said, standing up straighter, "I think I'd like to make a withdrawal today." "Of course. What amount were you thinking?" I looked through the glass doors at David Brennan's office, where he was probably already preparing to explain to Marcus how quickly they could steamroll his naive wife. "Let's start with $1 million, I said. Cash. The look on David Brennan's face when I returned to his office 20 minutes later was worth everything I'd endured over the past few days. I wasn't the same woman who'd walked out to make a phone call. Something fundamental had shifted in my posture, my voice, my entire presence. Mr. Brennan, I said, settling back into the chair across from his desk, I've had a chance to review my financial situation. Good, he said, already reaching for the settlement papers. I trust you found everything in order. Actually, there were a few discrepancies. I placed my father's credit card on his desk. This account wasn't included in the marital asset documentation. He glanced at it dismissively. Mrs. Mitchell, as I explained, a credit card, has a current balance of $47,800,000. The words hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. Brennan's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror as he realized what this meant. I am sorry. What did you say? My father left me a rather substantial inheritance that I was unaware of until today. Since I acquired this account before my marriage to Marcus, and since it was never commingled with our marital assets, I believe it remains my separate property. Brennan was frantically typing on his computer, probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of scam, but I could see the moment reality hit him. His face went pale. This changes things significantly. Yes, it does. I leaned back in my chair, feeling calmer than I had in days. You see, the settlement you've offered assumes I am a helpless woman with no resources, but what I actually am is a woman with substantial assets who has been married to a man who committed adultery, and is now trying to steal property that was never his. Mrs. Mitchell, I think we should table this discussion until I can consult with my client, and oh, there is no need for that. I interrupted. I've already made my decision. I'll be filing for divorce from Marcus on grounds of adultery. I'll be keeping my inheritance, obviously, but I am also going to pursue my fair share of the marital assets we accumulated during our marriage, including the house. The house is in both your names, but I was the one who maintained it, improved it, and increased its value, while my husband was busy planning his exit strategy with his mistress. I think a judge will be very interested to hear about that. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. Oh, and Mr. Brennan, you might want to advise your client to find somewhere else to live. I'll be changing the locks on my house this afternoon. As I walked toward the door, Brennan called after me. Mrs. Mitchell, we can negotiate. I am sure we can reach an arrangement that works for everyone. I turned back to look at him. The time for negotiation was before your client decided to humiliate and discard me. Now we're into consequences. I left him sitting in his glass office, probably already dialing Marcus's number to deliver the worst news of his cheating life. My next stop was Heritage Private Banking, where I met with Jennifer in person. She was an elegant woman in her 50s who treated me with the kind of respect I hadn't experienced in years. Your father was a remarkable man, she said as we reviewed the account details. He started with very modest investments in his 20s, and built this through careful planning and some very prescient decisions. He never touched the principal, just let it grow. The full scope of my inheritance was staggering beyond the cash account. There were real estate holdings, stock portfolios, and investment properties across the country. My father, the quiet accountant who never talked about money, had been worth over $60 million. He left very specific instructions about this account. Jennifer continued. He said it was only to be accessed if you truly needed it, if you found yourself in a situation where you needed to remember your own strength. Tears pricked my eyes. Even in death, my father was taking care of me. There is one more thing, Jennifer said, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. He left this for you, to be given only if you ever activated the account. Inside was a letter in my father's careful handwriting. Famey, dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, it means you've needed the anchor I left for you. I hope you never have to use it, but if you do, I want you to know something important. This money doesn't define your worth, but it does give you choices. I've watched you grow into a strong, intelligent woman, but I've also seen how the world sometimes tries to convince women they're smaller than they are. Don't let anyone, husband, boss, stranger, or friend, make you forget your value. Use this gift wisely. Use it to build the life you truly want, not the life someone else thinks you should have. And remember, you are always worthy of love and respect, with or without this inheritance. Your loving father, Robert Coleman Fay. I sat in that office and cried, for my father, for the marriage I'd thought I had, and for the version of myself I was about to leave behind. Word travels fast in wealthy circles, especially when it involves scandal and money. By the time I got home that afternoon, Marcus was already there, pacing in our driveway like a caged animal. Sarah. He rushed toward me as I got out of my car. We need to talk. There has been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said calmly, walking toward my front door. Just a revelation. He followed me inside, and I could see he was struggling to process this new dynamic. For 5 years, I'd been the accommodating wife who deferred to his decisions. Now I was a woman with options, and he wasn't sure how to handle that. David Brennan called me. He said you claim to have some kind of inheritance. Not a claim, Marcus, a fact. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and looked at him, really looked at him. $47 million and change, to be precise. He sat down heavily in one of our kitchen chairs. That is, how is that possible? Your father was an accountant. My father was a very good investor, and unlike some people I know, he believed in providing security for the people he loved. The barb hit home. Marcus flinched. Sarah. I know things got complicated with Cassandra, but complicated? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus, you plan to divorce me, take our house, and use the proceeds to buy a love nest with your mistress. That is not complicated. That is calculated. It wasn't like that. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots of his emails to Cassandra. I understand that while I was cooking your meals and maintaining your home, you were planning my destruction. I understand that you thought I was weak enough and stupid enough to just roll over and let you take everything. His face went white as he realized how completely I'd outmaneuvered him. How long have you known? Long enough to prepare. Did you really think I'd just accept that settlement offer? Did you think I'd let you and your girlfriend profit from our marriage while I struggled to afford an apartment? Sarah, please. We can work this out. Forget the settlement, we can start over. I made mistakes, but the word came out stronger than I'd ever said anything in my life. We can't work this out, Marcus. You can't unmake the choices you've made, and I can't unknow what I know about who you really are. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd planted, the life I'd built. You know what the saddest part is? You never even saw me. You saw a housekeeper, a hostess, a decorative object for your successful life. But you never saw the woman who loved you enough to give up her career, who supported you through every challenge, who would have forgiven almost anything if you'd just been honest with me. I do see you. I love you. You love the idea of what I could do for you. But Marcus, I am done being useful to you. He stood up and moved toward me, but something in my posture made him stop. What happens now? No, you leave. I am changing the locks tonight, and tomorrow my lawyer will file divorce papers. You'll be served at your office. I thought that was more dignified than having it done at Cassandra's apartment. You don't have to do this. Sarah, we can share everything 50-50, the house, the investments, all of it. I turned to face him, and I saw him truly register what he'd lost for the first time. Not just my money, my respect, my care, my willingness to make his life easier. Marcus, you had the chance to share everything with me. You chose to share yourself with someone else instead. Now you get to live with that choice. He tried a few more times to negotiate, to manipulate, to convince me that Cassandra meant nothing, and that we could rebuild our marriage. But I was done listening. I was done being the woman who absorbed his needs and his mistakes and his selfishness. Finally, he left to pack some clothes. I watched him move through our bedroom like a stranger, taking things that had never really belonged to him anyway. The expensive watch I'd bought him for our anniversary, the cufflinks he'd worn to our wedding, the framed photo of us from our honeymoon, back when his smile was genuine and his promises were real. When he was finished, he stood in the doorway of what had been our bedroom for 5 years. I never meant to hurt you, Sarah. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You just thought I wouldn't be strong enough to hurt you back. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of lawyers, meetings and revelations. My divorce attorney, Rebecca Chang, was a sharp woman who'd built her reputation dismantling cheating husbands and their elaborate schemes. Your case is a dream, she told me during our first meeting. Adultery, financial planning to defraud a spouse, and disparity of assets that heavily favors the injured party. Marcus Mitchell picked the wrong woman to underestimate. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Marcus's lawyer tried every angle, claiming I'd hidden assets during the marriage, arguing that my inheritance should be considered marital property, even suggesting that my father's timing in leaving me money was somehow suspicious. None of it worked. The evidence of Marcus's affair was overwhelming, the financial records showing his systematic preparation for divorce were damning, and the fact that he'd been planning to profit from our marital home, while leaving me virtually penniless, painted him as exactly the kind of calculating opportunist that judges despise. But the moment I'll remember forever happened during our final hearing. Marcus and his lawyer had just finished arguing that I should receive a minimal settlement, because I hadn't contributed significantly to the marriage's financial success. David Brennan was actually making the case that my 5 years as a homemaker had been a drain on Marcus's earning potential. When it was my turn to respond, I stood up slowly. I dressed carefully that morning, a navy blue dress that was elegant without being flashy, my grandmother's pearls, hair pulled back in a simple chignon. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman of substance who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "Your Honor," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, opposing counsel is correct that I haven't worked outside the home for 5 years. What he has failed to mention is that I spent those 5 years managing a household that allowed my husband to focus entirely on his career. I coordinated his social calendar, hosted events that brought him clients, and provided the stable foundation that enabled his professional success. I paused and looked directly at Marcus, who was shifting uncomfortably in his chair. But perhaps more importantly, during those 5 years, I was also apparently the only person in this courtroom who honored her marriage vows. While I was building a home and supporting my husband's career, Mr. Mitchell was building a relationship with another woman, and planning to use our shared assets to fund his new life. I turned back to the judge. Opposing counsel argues that I don't deserve a significant portion of our marital assets, because I didn't contribute to earning them. I would argue that I contributed something far more valuable, my trust, my loyalty, and 5 years of my life to a man who was lying to me every single day. The courtroom was completely silent. "Now, I don't need Mr. Mitchell's money, Your Honor. I am fortunate enough to have my own resources. But I believe this court has an obligation to send a message that marriage is a partnership based on honesty and good faith, and that breaching that partnership should have consequences." When I sat down, I could see Marcus staring at me like he'd never seen me before, and in a way, he'd never seen the woman I became when I stopped trying to be the woman he wanted. The judge ruled in my favor on every point. I got the house, half the investment accounts, alimony for 3 years, and a public record that would follow Marcus for the rest of his life. More importantly, I got my dignity back. But the real victory came later, at the small coffee shop where I met Rebecca to celebrate. "You know," she said, raising her latte in a mock toast, "I've handled a lot of divorce cases, but I've never seen someone turn the tables quite like you did." "I had help," I said, thinking of my father's letter. Good advice from someone who understood that strength isn't always loud. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I was standing in the garden of my Westchester home deadheading roses just like I had on the morning everything changed. But everything about the moment was different. The house was truly mine now, filled with furniture I'd chosen and art I loved rather than pieces selected to impress Marcus's colleagues. I'd converted his home office into a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a reading chair positioned to catch the morning light. I'd also done something my father would have approved of. I'd put my money to work, with help from Jennifer and the team at Heritage Private Banking. I'd started a foundation focused on supporting women transitioning out of domestic situations, women fleeing abuse, women re-entering the workforce after years at home, women who needed legal help with divorce proceedings. The Sarah Coleman Foundation had already helped dozens of women, and the work gave me a sense of purpose I'd never found in hosting dinner parties or maintaining the perfect household. I was also dating someone new, though new wasn't quite the right word. David Martinez had been my college boyfriend, the one I'd broken up with when Marcus swept me off my feet with his ambition and his promises of a fairy tale life. David was a teacher now, recently divorced himself, and when we'd reconnected at our college reunion 3 months ago, the conversation had flowed as easily as it had 20 years earlier. "You seem different," he'd said over dinner on our first official date. More centered. I guess. Like you know exactly who you are. I do. I'd replied. It just took me a while to remember. The morning I was thinking about all of this, my phone rang. The caller ID made me smile. It was Rebecca Chang. Sarah, you are not going to believe this, but I just got a call from David Brennan. Apparently, Marcus and his girlfriend are getting married next month, and he wants to know if you'd consider a reconciliation. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped my pruning shears. He wants what? According to Brennan, the girlfriend, Cassandra, is pressuring Marcus about money. Apparently she thought he was wealthier than he actually is. And now that she realizes most of his assets went to you in the divorce settlement, she is having second thoughts about their relationship. Let me guess. Marcus thinks if he comes crawling back to me, he can access my inheritance. Brennan was very careful not to say that explicitly, but yes, I think that is the implication. He mentioned something about the importance of family, and the mistakes of youth. I set down my gardening tools, and walked over to the bench, where I like to sit with my morning coffee. Rebecca, what did you tell him? I told him I'd relay the message to you and that you'd be in touch. Good, call him back and tell him this. Marcus Mitchell had 8 years to learn the importance of family. He chose to prioritize his own desires over our marriage vows, and he chose to try to destroy me financially when he decided he was done with our relationship. Now he gets to live with those choices. And if he persists? I looked around my beautiful garden, thought about the foundation work that was filling my days with meaning, and smiled. Tell him I am busy building a life that doesn't have room for people who've already proven they can't be trusted. After Rebecca hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, thinking about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. The old Sarah would have been tempted to forgive Marcus, to believe his promises of change, to take responsibility for his failures. The new Sarah understood something my father had tried to teach me with his final gift. True security doesn't come from someone else's promises. It comes from knowing your own worth and building a life that reflects that knowledge. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Faye, dinner tonight. I am cooking. Asterisk, I smiled and typed back. Faye, perfect, I'll bring wine. Asterisk, as I headed inside to get ready for my day. A foundation board meeting, lunch with a friend, and an evening with a man who saw me clearly and loved what he saw. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one Marcus had discarded 8 months ago. Not because I was wealthier now, or because I'd gotten revenge on my ex-husband. I was different because I'd remembered something I'd forgotten during all those years of trying to be the perfect wife. I was enough, exactly as I was. Marcus had done me a favor, really, by trying to destroy me. He'd forced me to discover my own strength. By discarding me, he'd freed me to build a life that was truly mine. And for that, for the failure of his cruelty and the revelation of my own resilience, I would always be grateful. Number epilogue. The last word. A year later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Marcus and Cassandra, it seemed, had worked through their financial concerns and decided to move forward with their marriage. I might have thrown the invitation away, but something about it caught my attention. The return address was for an apartment in Queens, a far cry from the luxury Manhattan penthouse they'd been dreaming about in those emails I'd found. Curious, I did a little research. Marcus's architectural firm had lost several major clients after word got out about his divorce proceedings. Apparently, wealthy couples don't love working with architects who've publicly demonstrated their willingness to betray their spouse's trust. Cassandra, meanwhile, had been fired from her marketing job when her affair with a married client became public knowledge. She was working as a freelancer now, picking up whatever projects she could find. They were making it work according to my research, but just barely. The fairy tale life they'd planned to build on the ruins of my marriage had crumbled when they'd lost access to my assets. I looked at their invitation, cheap cardstock with generic fonts, and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. They were so small, these two people who'd thought they could use my love and loyalty as stepping stones to their own happiness. They'd traded everything: integrity, relationships, security, for a few months of passion and the illusion of easy money. No, they had each other, and according to all the evidence, that wasn't nearly enough. I tucked their invitation into the drawer where I kept important papers. Not because I was planning to attend their wedding, but because it was a reminder of something valuable. The people who try to diminish you usually end up diminishing themselves. That evening, David and I were cooking dinner together in my kitchen, when he asked what had made me smile earlier. Just remembering something my father used to say, I told him, chopping vegetables while he stirred sauce. He always said the best revenge against people who try to hurt you is to build a life so good they realize what they lost. David laughed. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. I agreed. Thinking of the letter that was still tucked in my jewelry box, the words that had helped me remember my worth when I'd forgotten it. He definitely was. As we ate dinner that night talking about our plans for the weekend and the Foundation's newest initiatives, I realized that my father had been right about everything. The money he'd left me had given me choices and security, but the real inheritance was simpler than that. The knowledge that I was worth protecting, worth investing in, worth believing in. Marcus and Cassandra were welcome to their small dishonest life. I had something infinitely more valuable, the ability to look in the mirror and respect the woman looking back, and that, I thought, was worth more than all the money in the world.